There are places where people disappear. Not because anyone follows them, not because wild animals attack, but because the forest itself refuses to let them leave. Across the vast woodlands of Eastern Europe, travelers have whispered the same unsettling stories for centuries. Paths that move, voices that imitate loved ones, trees that seem to change places overnight. And somewhere between those ancient trunks, something is always watching. In Slavic folklore, that presence has a name: Leshy, guardian of the forest, trickster, protector, or perhaps something far older than any legend remembers. Tonight we'll explore the forgotten mythology of Leshy, where the stories came from, why generations feared entering certain forests, and what these legends may reveal about the oldest beliefs of the Slavic world. There's an old warning remembered throughout the forests of Eastern Europe. If you ever lose your way among the trees, do not trust the path beneath your feet. A trail that seemed familiar only moments ago may lead somewhere entirely different. A landmark you passed before may suddenly vanish, and sometimes, no matter which direction you choose, the forest seems determined to keep you wandering. For centuries, people searched for explanations. Some blamed exhaustion, some blamed fear. Others believed something far older was responsible. According to Slavic folklore, the forests were never truly empty. They belonged to an ancient spirit, a being that knew every tree, every hidden trail, and every creature that lived beneath the forest canopy. A being that could appear as a man, a beast, a shadow, or even the forest itself. The old villagers called him Leshy, and they believed that once he noticed you, finding your way home was no longer entirely up to you. The forests of Eastern Europe once stretched for thousands of miles. Long before roads connected distant villages, forests covered vast regions of the land. Travelers often spent days moving beneath endless branches. Hunters disappeared. Woodcutters lost their way. Children wandered from familiar paths and were never seen again. In a world where the wilderness could swallow a person without a trace, stories naturally emerged. Stories about something watching from between the trees. Something that could imitate voices. Something that could change the forest around you. And something that seemed to enjoy leading travelers astray. The first descriptions of Leshy were often contradictory. Some claimed he appeared as a tall man with a beard made of moss and roots. Others described glowing eyes hidden among the branches. Some believed he could grow as tall as the tallest pine. Others said he could shrink to the size of a mushroom. But nearly every story agreed on one thing. Leshy was never truly separate from the forest. He was part of it, as old as the roots beneath the soil, as silent as the shadows between the trees, and just as difficult to understand. But legends rarely remain just stories. Across centuries, travelers continued to report strange experiences deep within the forest. Some were woodcutters who swore they walked in straight lines for hours only to return to the same broken tree again and again. Others were hunters who heard their own voices calling from deeper within the woods, even when no one else was there. In several accounts, entire groups of people claimed that the forest itself had changed while they were still inside it. Paths that had been open moments before were suddenly blocked by dense thickets. Rivers appeared where no water had flowed the day before. And sometimes the forest would grow silent in a way that felt unnatural, as if every living thing was listening. Those who managed to escape often described the same feeling. Not fear of the forest, but the feeling of being observed, not by animals, not by other people, but by something that understood exactly where they were at all times. Some survivors spoke more directly. They said they saw a figure between the trees, always just out of focus, never fully visible. One moment it looked like a man standing still. The next it was part of the trunk of a tree, or a shadow stretched unnaturally long across the forest floor. And when they tried to approach it, it was never closer, only further away. According to old beliefs, this was how Leshy preferred to reveal himself. Not through violence, not through attack, but through confusion. He would let a traveler notice him only briefly, just enough to create doubt, just enough to make them question what they had seen. Some stories claimed Leshy could imitate sounds, the cry of a bird, the snap of a branch, the voice of a friend, or even the voice of a family member calling from somewhere in the distance. Many villagers believed that answering those calls was a mistake, because no matter how far a person followed them, the source remained just beyond reach. And nearly every legend agreed on one thing. If the forest wanted to keep you, it rarely did so by force. It simply convinced you that the way home was just a little farther ahead. There's a strange moment that appears again and again in old Slavic stories. It is the moment when people realize they are no longer alone. Not because they hear footsteps, not because they see a shadow, but because the forest itself begins to feel different. The air grows unnaturally still. Birdsong disappears without warning. Even the wind seems to pause, as though the trees themselves are listening. The old storytellers believed this was never a coincidence. They said the forest had noticed you, and once that happened, someone else had noticed you as well. According to countless village tales, Leshy rarely revealed himself immediately. He preferred to remain unseen, watching, waiting, learning who had entered his domain. Many believed he could observe travelers for hours without making a sound. Some imagined him standing silently behind enormous pines. Others believed he became indistinguishable from the bark itself. If you looked directly at him, you would see nothing unusual. But if you looked away, you might feel eyes following every step. Perhaps the strangest thing about Leshy was that no two witnesses ever described him the same way. Some claimed he looked like an old hunter wearing rough animal skins. Others swore his beard was woven from moss and hanging roots. Some insisted his skin resembled cracked tree bark. Others remembered only glowing green eyes floating between the branches. There were even stories that claimed he had no face at all, only darkness where a face should have been. In many regions, people believed Leshy could become any creature of the forest. A wolf, a raven, a bear, a falling branch, even an ordinary traveler asking for directions. That uncertainty was part of his power. If anything in the forest could be Leshy, then nothing could ever be trusted completely. Some legends claimed he laughed before revealing himself. Not loudly, not maliciously. Only a distant chuckle carried by the wind. So faint that you could almost convince yourself you imagined it. And perhaps That was exactly what he wanted. According to old beliefs, Leshy rarely needed strength to capture a traveler. The forest did the work for him. People who became lost often described the experience in remarkably similar ways. The path ahead looked perfectly ordinary. Nothing appeared unusual. No fallen trees blocked the way. No storm forced them to change direction. And yet, hours later, they found themselves standing exactly where they had started. Some walked in circles until sunset. Others wandered through the entire night. Many insisted they had followed the same straight trail without turning once. But the forest had quietly folded around them. Villagers believed this was Leshy's favorite trick, not frightening people, confusing them. Because confusion slowly becomes fear, and fear changes the way a person thinks. The more frightened someone became, the more impossible it was to escape. Old hunters warned that panic belonged to Leshy. Calm belonged to those who wished to return home. Some stories tell of travelers hearing familiar voices, calling from somewhere among the trees. A mother, a brother, a friend, sometimes even someone who had died many years before. The voice always sounded close, just beyond the next hill, just behind the next cluster of trees. Those who followed the voice almost never found its source. Instead, they walked deeper into places no path had ever reached. Other stories speak of lights drifting silently between the trunks, not bright enough to illuminate the forest, only enough to invite curiosity. Some believed these lights were wandering spirits. Others believed Leshy himself created them. Either way, following them was considered a terrible mistake, because every step taken away from the path made returning that much harder. Perhaps that is why the oldest stories never describe Leshy as a monster. He does not chase, he does not roar, he does not hunt the way wolves hunt. He simply makes certainty disappear, and once a person no longer trusts their own eyes. The forest no longer needs walls. It has already become a prison. For those who lived beside the great forests of Eastern Europe, Leshy was never just a frightening tale told to children. He was understood as something far older. Not a monster, not a demon, but the master of a living world. To the ancient Slavs, every part of nature possessed its own spirit. Rivers had their guardians. Lakes had their mysterious inhabitants. Homes were watched over by unseen protectors. And the forest belonged to Leshy. This belief shaped the lives of hunters, woodcutters, shepherds, and travelers for centuries. Before entering deep woodland, some would quietly greet the forest aloud. Others would leave a small offering beneath an old tree. A piece of bread, a pinch of salt, sometimes a few coins. Not because Leshy demanded payment, but because respect was believed to preserve the balance between humans and the wilderness. Those who entered arrogantly were thought to invite disaster. A hunter boasting about his skill might suddenly lose every trail. An experienced woodsman could wander for hours through places he had known since childhood. Axes disappeared. Footprints vanished. The forest itself seemed unwilling to let them leave. According to old beliefs, Leshy rarely punished without reason. He responded to pride, to cruelty, to greed. The wilderness was not viewed as something to conquer. It was something to enter as a guest. Even today, echoes of these customs survive. Some people still avoid shouting in deep forests. Some refuse to whistle among ancient trees. Others instinctively thank the forest before leaving. Whether these traditions preserve forgotten truths or simply remind us to respect nature depends entirely on what one chooses to believe. As Christianity gradually spread across the Slavic lands, the old spirits of forests, rivers, and mountains did not simply disappear. Instead, they changed. The ancient guardians became creatures of folklore. Sacred places became haunted places. Old gods became dangerous spirits. Leshy was no exception. Stories that once described the keeper of the forest slowly transformed into tales of a mysterious being who deceived travelers and frightened those who entered the woods after sunset. Yet traces of his older nature remained. Unlike many monsters of folklore, Leshy was never portrayed as evil for the sake of evil. He could punish, but he could also guide. He could terrify, but he could also protect. Many old stories tell of lost children being gently led back to safety after respectfully greeting the forest. Hunters sometimes claimed an unseen presence warned them away from dangerous marshes or unstable cliffs. Others believed Leshy deliberately frightened people to keep them away from sacred places deep within the woods. This strange contradiction is what makes him so different from the villains of modern horror. He is not driven by hatred. He is driven by balance. The forest gives life. The forest also takes it away. Leshy simply represents both sides of that truth. Perhaps that is why these legends have survived for hundreds of years. Not because people feared monsters, but because they understood something we are only beginning to remember. That nature does not belong to us. We belong to nature. By now, you may be wondering whether the Leshy ever truly existed. It is a question people have asked for centuries, but perhaps it is not the right question. Legends are rarely created from nothing. Some begin with fear, others with wonder, and some grow from experiences that are simply too strange to explain. For the ancient Slavs, the forest was not empty. It breathed. It changed with the seasons. It hid dangers that no village could control. A child could disappear within minutes. A hunter could lose his way in familiar woods. A storm could erase every trail before nightfall. In a world like this, the forest needed a guardian. Not because people demanded proof, but because they understood that some places were greater than themselves. That guardian became the Leshy. Yet no two villages described him in exactly the same way. Some said he appeared as an old man with bark instead of skin. Others claimed he was impossibly tall, his head disappearing into the branches. Some believed he had glowing green eyes. Others insisted his face looked completely human. Until you noticed that something about it felt terribly wrong. There were stories in which he walked beside wolves. Others claimed he could become a raven, a gust of wind, or even an ordinary tree standing quietly beside the path. Perhaps that is why no one could ever agree on his appearance. Because the Leshy was never meant to have one. He was not simply a creature living inside the forest. He was the forest. Its silence, its patience, its mystery, its power to humble anyone who believed they could conquer it. That idea survived for generations, not because every person saw the same thing, but because every generation experienced the same feeling, the feeling that somewhere beyond the next tree, the forest was watching. There is something even more remarkable. The ancient Slavs were not alone. Across Europe, across Asia, across countless cultures, people imagined guardians living among ancient trees. Different names, different faces, yet strangely similar stories. Perhaps humanity has always felt that forests possess a life of their own, a place where the rules of everyday life no longer apply, where silence feels different, where time moves more slowly, where every step reminds us how small we truly are. Maybe the Leshy was one way of explaining that feeling, or perhaps he was something more. Today, many people walk through forests carrying satellite maps, phones, and GPS devices. We believe we have conquered the wilderness, that every path can be measured, every mountain mapped, every mystery explained, and perhaps, most of the time, we are right. Yet something curious still happens. When evening falls beneath ancient trees, people instinctively lower their voices. Children stop running. Even those who claim to fear nothing find themselves listening more carefully. To the wind, to the branches, to the silence. Perhaps this has nothing to do with spirits, or perhaps the oldest legends continue living in places where words are no longer needed. The Leshy may never step from behind a tree. You may never hear your name whispered among the pines, but the feeling that someone or something shares the forest with you has never truly disappeared. Maybe that is why these stories have survived for hundreds of years. Not because they ask us to believe, but because they remind us that nature is not merely scenery. It is older than us, stronger than us, and worthy of our respect. So if you ever find yourself walking alone beneath ancient trees, and for just a moment, the birds fall silent, the wind stops, and the forest seems to hold its breath, do not be afraid. Simply remember, some mysteries do not need to be solved. They only ask to be respected. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of the oldest legends of Slavic folklore. If you enjoyed this story, there are many more forgotten tales waiting to be uncovered. Until next time, walk gently and listen carefully, because somewhere, deep within the forest, the old stories are still alive.